All right, it is time for the next step in our Frogger game. But before we do that, there was a little bit of a bug in our in the way we were doing the logs. It had to do with this code here about when we are touching the river. So we could jump onto the log and that worked, but we couldn't jump off. It would say that we drowned. And the reason for that is so we have this if touching river. We don't want to just say that Frogger drowned as soon as Frogger touches the river because there's this little bit of river around the log, so the log can actually float in the river. So we wait a second and then we say if we're not touching the log, then drown. But that resolves to true when we've jumped across, right? So we were touching the river and then a half second later, we weren't touching the log. So what we actually need is this condition, right? If we're touching the river, wait a half a second. If we're still touching the river and we're not touching the logger, then we've drowned, right? And the new code is going to allow us, whoops, I jumped to the river. So we know if I jump straight in the river, I can drown. But if I wait for the log, I should be able to jump onto it and back off and across the river, etc. Another thing that I did was here, you can see my change y is now 2 and -2 instead of 1, and that helps a little bit with the jumping across the river to the log, and it also makes it look a little bit more like Frogger's hopping. So that's that part. Another thing is I'm going to replace this with a broadcast. I made a events for splish and splash, splish and splat, and we're going to use those instead. And that's a splish. So the next thing we're going to add is the lily pad. And the lily pad is the home base where Frogger can go, and if we cover all of the lily pads, then we're going to say that Frogger has 1. And I'm going to start with just 1 lily pad. And the lily pads don't actually do much. For now, I'm actually going to send my lily pad to the middle so that I can test my code without having to jump across the river. And you'll notice I have obstacles in here, but I've disconnected them just so I can work on just my lily pad for now. And I'm actually going to send the lily pad back. And we'll see why I'm going to do that in a minute. So I'm actually going to just disconnect my log for now too, just so I can start and stop quickly. Okay, so I've got my lily pad. The lily pad has a very simple costume, but obviously you should make something a little more attractive. But so I've got my lily pad. Now I need to have some logic to tell me what to do when Frogger's touching the lily pad, and I'm going to keep track of a couple of things. So first of all, I'm just going to check to see if Frogger has covered the lily pad, or has touched the lily pad. Now one thing with this, uh-oh, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Frogger, I'm using the turtle costume, and the turtle costume, you can see I'm just right-clicking on the costume, and it's usually this pen is set to the tip. If I set it to the middle, that's going to allow me to have the middle of the turtle costume be where Frogger can go to, and that's going to help me. So what I want to do when Frogger touches the lily pad is actually show it as being covered by Frogger, and so I'm actually going to I'm going to create an if else real quick, and just work inside the else to start. But the main case that we want to have is when Frogger touches the lily pad, then I want Frogger to go to the lily pad and create a clone of itself, and we're not actually going to give Frogger any functionality for itself when it's a clone. We're just going to leave it there. Now I'm going to need a couple of variables. There's a couple of things I'm going to keep track of. I want to know when this lily pad is covered. And I'm going to call this lily1 covered. So initially, lily1 covered is going to be set to false. But once Frogger, I'm going to grab a true because we need that in a sec. Once Frogger covers it by touching it, I'm going to set lily covered to true. So let's just test this real quick. So lily covered is not false, but when Frogger touches it, it switches to true. So Frogger went to the lily pad, go to lily pad, created a clone, which is just sitting there, moved back to the beginning and set lily covered to true. Now, if Frogger goes again, I don't want this to keep happening. This lily is now covered. I am going to test if the lily1 is covered. I actually want Frogger to die. Frogger is not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to go back to a lily that's been covered. So I'm going to broadcast splat, and first I'm going to move Frogger back to the beginning. So let's test this. Frogger can go and cover the lily the first time, but the second time, oh, Frogger died. So this is what we want to happen, but we're going to keep track. We also want to keep track to see if we've covered all the lilies. So I'm going to make a lilies covered, and initially lilies covered is going to be 0, but when I cover that one, I'm going to change it by 1, right? So Frogger can come and cover that one, and now lilies covered is 1. So I can create additional lilies, and I can use that logic of how many lilies are covered to check to see if I've won. And we're not going to do that functionality to check to see if Frogger has won or lost. We're going to do that later. But I'm going to set my lily pad to go up above the river, and let's just see what this looks like in the context of the game. I'm going to uncheck those variables. Oh, I want my logs back. Come back, logs. So my logs are moving. I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna cover the lily. Great. And if I had left lilies covered checked, we'll see that that is now 1. So that's great. So let's. We're gonna want more than one of these lilies. So let's duplicate this. Let's call this one lily pad 1, and let's make a lily pad 2, and we'll set it. Let's just set it to the middle for now. So I'm just going to do 2 lily pads, but this logic here is going to be very similar, right? And there's a little bit of duplication here. I tried doing the lily pads with clones, but I couldn't get the go-to working. You could do this where you do the lily pads with clones, and if you're touching any lily pad, you go to a position based on where Frogger's position is, and then cover it. But I'm going to do it this way. So if Frogger is touching lily pad 2, and I need to update this to lily pad 1, and I need some new variables, right? So I need lily 2, whoops, lily 2 covered, right? And I need to initialize that to false. And so now if Frogger touches lily pad 2, and it's not covered, then go to lily pad 2, create a clone, go back to the beginning, set lily pad 2 covered to true, and change lilies covered. So let's leave lilies covered. So let's test this out. So I'm going to cover lily pad 2, and lilies covered is 1. Oops. So it looks like my go-to didn't work. Oh, because my go-to lily pad, I hadn't updated it to go-to lily pad 1. So I hadn't updated that reference. So let's try that again. There's that one. There's that one. So I have covered 2 lilies, and now I could have some more logic to say that if I've covered all the lilies, then I've won. And like I said, we'll do that in another lecture next time. Now, we are actually, we need our game to be a little harder. So normally in the space between the lilies, there's another obstacle like the river, which if you touch will also destroy, will kill Frogger. So I'm actually just going to duplicate the river, but I'm going to have it go a little higher, and I'm going to change the color of its costume, and I'm going to make it be something super simple. I'm just going to make it red for now so that it's obvious. So let's just see if I got the position right, and then I want it to go all the way to the back. And I had made my lily pads go back 10 layers, so let's make this one go back 11. Let's see. How do I get my lily pads in front? So let's just get them to the front so that I can see them. Okay, and I'm gonna call this red guy the river bank. Maybe I should have made it a different color. And Frogger is gonna have very similar code to when it's touching the river to see if it's touching the river bank. Let's clean this up. Whoops. I didn't want the comment. I wanted clean up. My code is getting a little disorganized. So now, if I'm touching the river bank and not, I want this to be any lily pad. So for now, I'm going to make it just a two-way OR with lily pad 1 or lily pad 2. So now we have the same logic, and instead of splish, this is going to be splat. Where's my broadcast? Broadcast, splat. All right, so let's test that part. Let's just see if I can splat. Boom. So Frogger can splat. And I should have, I could have that send him back to the beginning, but let's test it with going to one of the lilies. Great, so that still works. And let's test the other one. Great. So we have lily pads and a riverbank, and we could make more lily pads. And if we make more lily pads, we have to update this, this script here that allows us to test if Frogger's touching the riverbank. So we would need to add those new lily pads to the OR. And then we would need to add that functionality to this code here that tests to see if the lily pads are covered. That's it for the lily pads for now. So so far we have our obstacles, we have our logs, we have our lily pads. We'll have one more screencast on how to tell if Frogger has won or lost. We're going to have Frogger have some number of lives that are that can be exhausted. So that is the lily pads.